Okay, so this is a story we try to draw attention to. It is, frankly, and this is something people who are in the Sudan will point out, or people who are advocating for it. Yeah, it doesn't get the attention it should. A lot of people feel it's because it's a black famine or black people who are mostly being the victims of it. I do think that's part of it. I think it's also because we're not funding one side in this conflict. So as a nation, we don't feel as much responsibility directly for it.
Right, we're not
But
throwing people out of the country for talking about it either.
right, so it's not as personal for the United States, but it is terrible that this is getting ignored as much as it is. So here's a little video about what's happening in Sudan right now.
Space of 2 months, over 100,000, let me repeat, 100,000 children starved to death in Sudan over the space of 2 months. And it's not lost on me that we hear barely a peep. It's so hard to get updates on what's happening in Sudan from reliable sources, because African suffering, African starvation, African pain is just seen as the norm. 24 million people are suffering from food insecurity in Sudan. Women are being raped to the point where they're just unaliving themselves rather than be humiliated and attacked in the ways that they have been. Tens of thousands of people have been unalived by the RSF, and over 12 million people have been displaced more than once. I saw one lady saying there is nothing left for us but death. Now imagine, like, this is children, this is babies, this is women, this is men, you know, with no means to survive and with no hope on the horizon. Al Fasher alone has nearly 5 million people experiencing emergency levels of food insecurity. 5 million people. This includes.
Okay. So let me just expand this so I can read her name. That is Dr. Shola Mas Shugbamimu, if you want to look up her account. So this is Ryan Rusbiani. Do not forget Sudan. Over 500,000 babies have died of hunger since the war began 842 days ago. Again, I mean, this is horrible that this gets almost no attention.
Yeah,
Not
such
in
a mass
mainstream
scam.
media, not in our space, really nowhere. The international aid agencies asking for donations have less than 10% of the funding they require to really meet the need. Um, Sudan is being forcefully starved. In the city of Al Fasher, which shelters over 1 million people, families are surviving on toxic animal feed just to stay alive. Al Fasher has been under siege by the RSF since April 2024. Hospitals have been bombed, aid is being blocked, civilians are being targeted. This from One Path Network. Do not forget Sudan. Sudan is facing a catastrophic famine described by the UN as the world's worst humanitarian crisis in 2025. Nearly 30.4 million people, more than half the country, now depend on emergency aid, while 24.6 million are trapped in acute food insecurity. Among them, over 637,000 people are enduring famine conditions, IPC Phase 5, in some of the hardest hit regions, including Zamzam, Al Salam, and Abu Shuk. IDP camps in North Darfur, as well as the western Nuba Mountains. Children are bearing the brunt of this man made disaster. 522,000 children have already died from hunger-related causes. Despite the scale of the tragedy, aid deliveries remain dangerously inadequate. The suffering in Sudan is unfolding largely out of sight. 12 million people are internally displaced, and over 4 million refugees have fled to neighboring countries where food aid is also running out. Entire communities in Darfur, Kordofan, and the Nuba Mountains are on the brink of starvation, surviving on foraged leaves and contaminated water. This crisis is not a distant tragedy. It is a daily reality of preventable death, the direct result of siege tactics and neglect. Do not forget Sudan. Every share, every donation, and every voice raised can push this silent catastrophe back into the world's conscience and pressure governments to deliver the food, medicine, and safe passage that millions of Sudanese need to survive. And that's why we do these segments. And I will point you to some aid organizations that are active there at the end of the segment. And yeah, there is an absolute horrific crisis of sexual abuse. This article from Human Rights Watch: fighters assault women and girls, hold sex slaves. There are reports of children as young as 1 being attacked by armed men. This kind of violence is used as a tactic of war, as it tragically has been in many places throughout history. We like to think we're beyond this, but we're not. And it is a war crime. So this is a report on what's going on in Sudan from Sky News.
This is a suffocated city, cut off from food and fuel for over a year. The volunteers keeping people alive are on the back of this cart. You'll die of hunger, he says, and no one will even care. This rare footage from inside Al-Fashir is a picture of paralysis. The city's been relentlessly targeted by the RSF, who tightened their siege after Sudan's army reclaimed the capital. The entire city is now a militarized zone, and no filming is allowed. Thousands are squeezed into these tents on the edges of Al-Fashir. The famine declared in displacement sites, attacked and ransacked by the RSF, may have spread to these rare safe zones where aid can't reach, and families are forced to eat animal feed to stay alive.
We are suffering so much from no food, no water. We are hungry. Our children are naked. We have nothing to eat but animal feed. There is no water. We have nothing.
Volunteers are doing what they can to stave off starvation, offering one small dish of starch to take the edge off. Humanitarian aid convoys have made it into North Darfur but can't come anywhere near the city without facing fire from RSF militiamen upholding their brutal siege.
Yeah, to highlight how impossible it is to bring aid, to bring food to El Fasher. There was another convoy, UN convoy, with 15 trucks that tried to reach El Fasher at the very beginning of June. It could not, and there were 5 people, 5 aid workers that were killed at this moment, and since then no more convoy has been able to reach El Fasher. In April we received several men injured with gunshots in MSF supported hospital in Tawila, and they were injured by rapid support forces and their allies because they were trying to bring food to Zamzam at the time.
So very similar. Obviously a very different situation with different underpinnings, but some of the same kinds of horrors you see out of Gaza, where aid workers are killed trying to deliver aid, where you have this suffering, starving population that people want to help, but they're not able to get through because of the conflict. This is from Zay. The famine has reached level 5 in Sudan. It's catastrophic, to say the least. Worst famine in 40 years worldwide, but it's barely making it into a single headline. I'm so fucking sick and tired of the world's selective empathy and activism. You'd give a damn if our skin wasn't black. Our color determines our humanity and whether we are worthy of saving, as if we don't all bleed red, as if our lives aren't just as precious, as if we aren't loved by our families. This level of dehumanizing is brain altering. And for anybody who's going to say that it has nothing to do with it, I want you to imagine if this were happening in any white European country. It just never would. It just never would.
Get
it
to
would
that
never. Point. It would never be permitted. What the woman said in the first video, African suffering is just assumed to be normal. It is. It is.
Right, of course.
Hey, man, even if you're an activist, you are a product of your culture. You have been conditioned, if you are from this culture, you have been conditioned from birth to think this is how things are in Africa.
Right. Exactly.
So when it happens in Africa, you accept it in a way that you would be horrified if this happened in Italy, right? Who would let that happen in Italy? They'll let it happen in Africa. Adamola. As you remember Palestine, remember Sudan, remember Congo, another place we've reported on. We are all fighting the same oppressor. Nina Turner, free Sudan, free Congo, free Haiti, free Palestine, free all oppressed peoples, including those here in the United States. The struggle is intertwined. Yes, we're going out to do our documentary on Uhuru soon. One of the things I find so inspiring about them is they have maintained that vision of an international struggle in a way that a lot of the left in this country, at one time, that was very common rhetoric, particularly among black radicals. And that's kind of died on the vine, at least in the most visible portions of the activist spaces. And I think that is something we need to bring back because it is all intertwined. So the UAE apparently is funding the RSF. So this was a video that The Economist did explaining why that might be.
The United Arab Emirates backing a genocidal militia. Satellite images and UN reports show the UAE is arming a paramilitary group, which is trying to take over Sudan by force. The country's civil war has displaced 12 million people and left 25 million facing acute hunger. The UAE rejects these accusations, but evidence of its role backing the rapid support forces is overwhelming. So why is it involved? One argument is that the UAE wants Sudan's gold. There are multiple gold mines in Sudan, including here, here, and here. And gold is important to the Emirates. The country has become a gold refining hub, and gold is now its most valuable non-hydrocarbon export. But here's the thing, the UAE already imports almost all of Sudan's gold. What's more, the Emirates has a $500 billion economy, so importing slightly more gold doesn't make much of a difference. Another argument is agriculture. Sudan has more land that could be used for farming than any other African country. That interests the UAE, which is highly dependent on imports. As a desert country, 90% of its food comes from abroad. But the UAE already controls tens of thousands of hectares of Sudanese farmland and imports tens of millions of dollars of its crops. Others suggest that the UAE is after geopolitical influence. Sudan has a large coastline on the Red Sea. That makes it a strategic location for trade and security. But there's another explanation, a more compelling one. The UAE seems motivated by ideology. Its president, Mohammed bin Zayed, is fiercely hostile to political Islam. In Sudan, Islamist officers wield power within the army. That seems to be why the UAE is backing a militia that's fighting against the army. It follows a pattern of the Emirates trying to carve out its own sphere of influence, distinct from regional rivals like Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Turkey. A few years ago, it supported a warlord who unsuccessfully tried to overthrow the government of Libya. It supports secessionists in Yemen. It also backs the leaders of Puntland and Somaliland, two breakaway republics in Somalia. And the UAE is skeptical of the Islamist-led government that has emerged in Syria. But nowhere has its foreign policy had more devastating consequences than in Sudan, where the government accused the UAE of complicity in genocide. The UAE's policy has managed to anger America, China, and Russia, no small feat in 2025. Even though the RSF has lost some ground, there are no signs that Emirati support for the militia is waning. That means its role fueling the world's worst humanitarian crisis looks likely to continue.
Okay, so you should remember that, at least on paper, we have friendly relations with the UAE. We're allied with the UAE. So you're meant to believe that we are horrified by Iran and the Iranian government. But the UAE is literally funding a genocide in Africa. And no, we're cool with them. Israel, yeah, they're committing a genocide. They're not even using a proxy. We're good with them. You know, we have that on the soundboard, the Mitchell and Webb thing. Are we the baddies? The more you dig into these things, the more you have to say, yes, we are the baddies. It is not our business if in Sudan they want to have an Islamist government. That is no business of ours. That's no business of the UAE. But in the end, if they want to spin it to you that there's some justification for this, that's what they're going to tell you. Well, you know, radical Islam is the government. You know, they have to. Okay. So what happened when they asked Madeleine Albright about 500,000 dead children in Iraq? Was it worth it? Yeah, I think it was. These people are psychotic. They're psychotic. And if you look at the average human being, they don't support this. Our leaders are psychopaths.
If I could just add one thing to that, because I think it's important to highlight what the guy said about it being ideological, which is a good point. You know, Misty Winston just had Brad Pierce on her show a couple weeks ago, who wrote this whole piece about, you know, the UAE really rising as a significant global power. And they're a very cash-rich country. And we assume when a country in the Middle East is cash-rich, it's because of their oil. And yes, the UAE is oil-rich, which is a great source of their wealth. But it's not the only source of their wealth, okay? They attract a lot of real estate dollars, a lot of tourism dollars, a lot of financial services dollars, a lot of AI, things like that. What does that require? That requires an integration into the Western world. So just as Israel is an aircraft carrier, I think the UAE is trying to position themselves as another sort of Western aircraft carrier, right? And really develop economically a lot of systems that attract Western investment, which would, of course, incentivize them to crush Eastern ideologies, right? You know, it's not just the oil. It's the fact that a big source of their wealth is their integration into the Western world in all of these other sectors.
Right. You know, I've been studying ancient civilizations. It's kind of been my project the last few months. And you look at this, and part of the tragedy is these cultures created civilization. I mean, they really, I mean, Sudan, that's one of the oldest civilized areas in the world. And we have such a condescension towards these regions. We have such a delusion that the West invented civilization, and these people are the backward ones. These people were civilized thousands of years before the Europeans. The Europeans were beating each other with clubs and living in tents when they had grand cities and irrigation. And we've come back as really the inheritors of the civilization that they created in what used to be known as the Near East, what we usually call the Middle East in North Africa. And it's like we are the children of these civilizations, and we came back and just destroyed the parent. And we frame them with just absolute disrespect and disdain. Like the inventors of civilization are uncivilized. We call them uncivilized, and look at what we do to them. Look at the inhumanity that we find an acceptable price to pay to achieve our geopolitical goals, but we're the civilized ones. So a few groups that are managing to get into Sudan and do good work. We've featured them before. The International Rescue Committee is one that you can donate to. Of course, the great Doctors Without Borders, the woman at the end of the second video there was from Doctors Without Borders. They are active in Sudan, and this is a new group on the list. Now, I can't guarantee this because I didn't go through the charity finder with this. They look legit, particularly given the amounts that they're asking for. You're going to scam. You're going to go bigger than $5,000. But it looks like that's a real grassroots organization on the ground in Sudan, and they're dealing in the local economy. So it seems like that makes it a little easier for them to deliver the aid. Like if you just give them the money, they're going to buy things locally and distribute them. But look into it. Look into it. Displacement and Health Relief Network update. We were able to send the first $1,000 to the community kitchen in El Fasher. This is the result. Hundreds of meals were prepared and served to displaced families and children fleeing unimaginable violence. So they take their donations through PayPal. They do have a website. Like I said, it seems very grassroots. According to them, they're made up of students locally. It's basically a local outfit. So do check it out. And we do what we can, man. We try to raise visibility. I know a lot of people who are in our space watch our show. Maybe try to do a story on this when you get a chance, because it is pretty disgraceful that this is like the forgotten genocide happening at the same exact time that the Gaza genocide is happening, and nobody's paying any attention to it.
Right. Exactly. And I think it's because we're not as intimately intertwined with the perpetrator as we are in the case of Israel, which we'll get to next. But it's still ultimately part of a very similar kind of project.
Please clap.